Good afternoon, everybody. Looks like we're waiting for some audio to connect yet. There we go. We'll let you get settled in and we'll get started in just a moment. Good afternoon. Hey, Kent, we recognize another fellow teacher trainer. Thanks for coming today. That's funny. I had an email draft up. I was just going to email you, so expect one later. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started in just a moment. Thanks for coming. We are very, very excited to have Portia back with us today. We're going to go ahead and toss an attendance link into chat. Thank you, Linda. Linda just threw an attendance link into chat. If you could go ahead and take a moment to click that. We won't collect any additional information. We're really just going to be, one second, there we go. Really just collecting your name, and that attendance link allows us to send you a certificate of attendance after the workshop. So you'll definitely want to click that. Expect the attendance or the certificate of completion, certificate of attendance to come out probably later this evening or tomorrow morning at the very latest. All right, we'll go ahead and get started so I can give Portia as much of this time as possible for her workshop. So everybody, thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much for coming for fun with P5JS and DOM interactivity tonight. I know I'm very excited about Portia's P5JS workshops. I know she inspired me the last time she did a workshop, and I actually started creating my own P5JS art. So I am very, very excited to see what she inspires me to do tonight. So Portia, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hi, good afternoon or evening or morning or wherever you are. Welcome to another session for P5JS, but this time we will learn how to add some interactivity. I have more things than I have time for, but I am actually looking for engagement from the audience, those who've joined. So you can control what we do today. So let's go over a couple of things and then we'll get into making some code with P5JS. So here is access to my slides for those of you who want to follow along and also just like open up some links, things like that. You can now use this beautiful QR code. Lori, you made it, yes, with the dinosaur. Or you can go to codehs.com/Morrell interactive slides. And now it is also in the chat. All right. Oh, let me go back. Just in case, if you have never used CodeHS before, you do need to sign up, and it is free. So you can go to codehs.com/sign up, and it is also in the chat. Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Linda. So here are my plans for today. A quick introduction like I always do. And also going over what DOM is, why is it easier in P5JS, an overview of P5JS and DOM functions that we will use today, but then also just knowing where you can find all of them. Skills that the students will learn. I also added skills that the students will need, or thinking about scaffolding these concepts into your unit or lessons. Various samples, how to apply it into the classroom, and additional resources in closing. So quickly about me, I was exposed to computer science in 7th grade and studied it in college. And I started in the computer science education world in 2011 as a coding instructor for summer camp. And I also spent 4 years in after-school programs as a program coordinator making STEM content. And I now work at a French school in New York City, teaching 8th through 10th grade, various languages, and I've been in this position for about 5 years. So I am currently teaching in 8th grade. We just started making our final web projects. So they're making a full website with HTML and CSS. My 9th graders are making mobile apps. We're not using CodeHS for this semester, but we did it in the first semester with P5JS, and they're currently using a software called Dunkable. And in 10th grade, we are doing podcasts. We're taking a break from coding, but we're still talking about technology and ethics, and they have to create a podcast about a question that they want to answer. So, as always, I would like to know, why are you attending this session? You can drop that into the chat. You can say things like, you want to know more about DOM and P5JS, or if you've never done P5JS before, I would also like to know that, just to know what type of lingo I should speak, especially if you didn't attend my other session. So why are you attending? Wanting to know how to use P5JS in the context of CodeHS. I've used it in other venues in the past. Okay. Learning first time. Perfect. Good to know. Just thinking about the lingo that I'll say today. Would like to learn. Okay. Also in the chat, if this is your first time using P5JS, you can also let me know that, just so that I might go over some things that I mentioned in a prior PD, just so that you can understand fully what P5JS is. For those of you who put things in the chat, thank you for sharing. And I have another question for you on the scale of inflatable ducks. How much do you know about P5JS and or HTML, CSS, and JS? So it's P5JS will be combining both, but I'm curious to know if you know anything about P5JS, or if you know anything about HTML and CSS. If you had to choose one of the 9 inflatable ducks, which one would you be? Would you be at 9, where the duck looks like it's dying? I don't know. 2. Okay, so pretty inflatable. Nothing. Okay. Lori and Linda, what would you be?
I think I'd have to be at least a partially inflated duck. I don't think
Yeah, I was thinking 5 for me, for sure. Like inflating, like getting there.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And we have some people in the chat saying nothing. So I guess I would call that 9. 9 looks like it's like dead. So, all right. Thank you for sharing. So let's talk about what DOM is. So DOM stands for Document Object Model. And this is going over some HTML language. So if you don't know what HTML is, it's the language that is used to make a website. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And DOM is pretty much structuring how things work in the website page. So you can see this is a visual, and then I'll go over the text on the right, but HTML is the root element. And so everything in HTML is using the term elements. So you can just think of it as like an object. So we have the head that contains a title that says my title. We have a body section that will have an element called A, which is a link, and it has some text for the link and an attribute attached to this element. So it's kind of like a hierarchy structure of what's going on in the web page. And so because DOM can do this, that means it has full access to the entire page. It can add things, change things, remove things, and that is done with JavaScript. So JavaScript is the brain of HTML. So HTML is the structure of a web page. JavaScript is the brain, which is pretty much the coding language that is backed or layered with making a website. And we also have this other term called CSS, which is the design side, or the way I explain it to my students, like the skin. So it makes the website look beautiful. And so using JavaScript to manipulate the DOM, we can change and remove all the elements and attributes on the page. We can change all the CSS styling, which is the design. We can add new elements to the page. We can react to existing elements by adding events or things that we're listening to, like if we click on something or if we press the mouse key. And we can also create new elements on the page. And so because we can do all of these things in JavaScript, there are a whole bunch of different avenues that we can go. We will stay with the simple and then build up to see how far we go in this PD. There we go. So I want to just explain to you the difference between DOM and P5JS and DOM and regular. So on the left, they're both creating a new button and adding it to the screen. But on the left, in order to make a button, honestly, you don't even need this part. You just need create button and then the text, and it will just create a button on the screen. var button means that we're saving the button as a variable, but you actually don't need this in order for the button to be created. On the right side, this is traditional JavaScript using DOM, and we have to create the elements, we have to create the button, we have to create the text for the button, and then we have to add the text to the button, and then add the button to the website or web page. So there's 4 steps versus 1 step in P5JS. So that's the difference. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. And Lori also mentioned links for my prior workshop will be in the follow-up emails, so that will help you get started in P5JS. So as a teacher, I will say I really work to think about what I want my students to use and do. And I just ran out of time to put one together for this particular workshop, but I normally would have a document reference for my students to access all of the content that I want them to know about a specific software or programming language. If you go to the original site that has all of the references, it's p5js.org, and there's a reference section. So if you go here, I'll drop this into the chat. What you'll see is pretty much everything that you can do. This is overwhelming for students. There are some students who do like to explore and to see what's possible, but just to get them started, I normally like to just have a Google site where I put together all of the things that I want them to know. So this is only a subset of the things that we have that they know how to do. And then I'll just add more examples or more things that I want them to know how to do in this site versus going to the original site. So I would recommend doing the same thing if you decide that you want to use DOM. This is the DOM section. You choose the things that you would want the students to learn how to do. You scaffold it and then also put it on a site or a place where they can always reference that information. I also start off with like old school paper. Honestly, I write out, like I make sample projects and then I write out all of the concepts that are in the sample project just to make sure that I know that I am planning to scaffold all of this information. And I think I put that in the slides too. All right, so yeah, I did. So helpful prior knowledge or scaffolding things. So this is the same thing I wrote on my paper, just put it in a slide. Because we're also using P5JS in some form or fashion, but I didn't put that as an option because I really wanted to just focus on the DOM side. And so focusing on the DOM side, I need to know some things about JavaScript, some things about HTML, and some things about CSS. And so I wrote those out. So in HTML, I need to know what a P tag is. P tag just stands for paragraph. I need to know, for one of the examples, what a span is. So a span is just a space where you can add text or information, but it's not a divider, which divider is like a whole box, and it takes up more space than the span. Select is allowing you to make drop-down options. A button is the button that you press. Input is a box that we type in. And also in input, we can add radio boxes, which is another thing that you'll see in my samples. So these are the things I know that my students need to know. So I need to somehow either plan this into my lessons for DOM or plan this beforehand as like something that you know that the students already know. CSS, I added some properties, but you can pretty much do any property in CSS. And so these 3 properties, background is to change the background of an element. So let's say I want to add a background to my paragraph tag. So I can do that with CSS, which is design. Color is to change the text color. And font family is to change kind of like the style of the text from like Arial to monospace. On JavaScript, there's a couple of things that I want my students to know or scaffold in. I want them to know about variables. So I need to be able to save things into a variable. I want them to know about if statements. And I also want them to know about functions with parameters. And I also added this last one called ternary operators, which is pretty much just a short version or shorthanded write-up of an if statement. Because what you'll realize is after you see the pattern, you end up writing a lot of code, and sometimes you just want that code to be shorter. And so one of the ways that we can shorten code is by making using a shorter if statement. So you'll see. All right, these are the things that I also list out what I want my students to learn in anything that is new. So for the DOM stuff, these are all the things that I want them to learn: how to create and read elements, how to set the styling of an element, how to identify patterns, and how to make my code or their code more efficient. And then I thought about some extras. There is a way for you to use lists and loops. You can grab all of the elements that are alike. For example, if I want to grab all of the buttons that exist, you can select all the buttons and then do something with the list of buttons. Thinking of maybe tic-tac-toe, possibly. Exploring properties that are not covered in the reference that I already made. So like I mentioned before, some students actually do appreciate looking through the entire reference doc to see what is possible. Because in my examples, I'm only covering some of these things, not everything. So let's go back. Any questions so far before we go into the samples? Okay. All right, so samples. Lori, you were ready. So when you click on this link, that's also in the chat, I put in here 3 samples. They're not really in a particular order, so I'm not going to go in the same order that they're in here. But I will start off with the traffic light, because the traffic light was the same or similar program that I did in the last PD that I did, which was to just show you what P5JS is. So P5JS is a visual thing. So we already have the traffic light in here, but I added DOM attributes to it. So I'm going to click on this one and take a look at how this works. So if you go ahead and take a click on it and take a look, I'll go over what is DOM and what is not. So in our last session, we learned that P5JS has 2 default functions. The first function is called setup, and that only runs one time. The second function is called draw, and this is an infinite loop or a forever loop. And so whatever we put in the draw function will draw infinitely. Even though these buttons are here, these are new, so I'll just disregard these for now. And so we can use shapes such as an ellipse, which is a circle, or an oval, and we can use rectangles to draw things on the screen. And when we want the shape to be a different color, we use fill as a command, and we just type in the color that we would want. Import ecosystem happens automatically because of some, yes, that is correct. So in Sandbox, you can, I'll do it in a different tab. In Sandbox, you can make your own P5JS programs by just going to the sandbox, typing in the name of your program and pressing create program. P5JS lives under JavaScript right here. And so by clicking on that, they already create the environment for you. And actually, the sandbox, I've mentioned this before in other PDs, but for all of my newcomers, I love the sandbox because the way I actually can tell if I can do something in CodeHS is based off of the sandbox. So I think one day I was in the sandbox and I said, oh, there's P5JS in here, and let's make some units on it. So that's how I kind of like figure out things. There's also the Java version, which is processing up here, and that is also available. Okay. So going back, so like I mentioned before, in the function draw, this is what's going to draw the items that we have on the screen. So I have 3 circles or 3 ellipses and a rectangle. My ellipses are currently white. I have a variable called current color. And in my setup function, I made the variables here, and I set all of my current color variables for red, green, and yellow to white because I want my traffic light to be controlled by buttons. So if I click on any of these buttons, they will change the traffic light to that color. And the way that I did this was I added some DOM. I made a function, or not made a function, but I called a function that already exists called create button. I set the text that will display here. And then this is a value that gets saved behind the scenes that I am going to use. I also attached, I could have done this on a separate line. I could have done r.mouse press on a separate line, but I've learned that you can also just do them on the same line, so it's less code. I attached an event. So this event means that if I click on this red button, let me make this a little bit bigger. If I click on this red light button, then I want you to activate this function called change light. So change light is not a function that exists. I made this function. And so students will also learn how to make their own functions, because when you have an event like mouse pressed, you have to point it to something else. And a function is just a space where you have code that only runs when it's called or when it's activated. And so in this case, this is going to get activated when I press the button. So if you want to take a look at what's happening in the change light function, I have 3 if statements that are looking at the value of the button. So this second parameter inside of create button is the value. So red light is displayed here, but behind the scenes, there is the value red. Yellow light is displayed here, but behind the scenes, it's the value is yellow. And then green light is the same way. I actually have all of the buttons when I press the button going to the same function. And the reason why I did this was because when you have a mouse pressed on a button, by default, it will send the information of that button to the function that we use. And the way that it works is because I'm using this keyword called this, it's pointing to the same exact button that I'm clicking on. So this, you actually see this in a couple of languages, like not Python. Does Python do this? I know Java does in JavaScript because this is in JavaScript, but this pretty much is pointing to the object that I clicked on. So this is very helpful because I don't have to say R, Y, and G. I don't have to talk to these specific variables. It's going to know exactly which button I'm talking about because it's going to send that information behind the scenes. And so if the value of the button that I'm clicking on is red, it's going to set the current color of R, which is the fill color of the top circle, to red, and then set the other ones back to white. And so that is how I got this to work. So if you wanted to, you can play around with this. You don't see it on my screen because it's my code, but there should be a fork button somewhere here, correct? Just making sure. So if you
Yep,
press
the fork button should be right up there at the top. So
yeah, some fork button here, and you can change some of the code. Maybe you want to just change the colors to see how that will work, or you can add extra features to the P5JS section, which is just the drawing down here. But yeah, you can make a copy of everything that we make or that you see. So any questions about this sample? Do you want me to give you some time to explore it, or shall we go to the next one? Yes, Lori. So just to recap what's in the chat, click on fork means that you'll get a copy exactly of my code. And it'll be your own. My newcomers, anybody have any questions? Oh, I forgot to mention this because it's here. Position allows you to choose an X and Y location on the canvas. So all of my other, well, I have one more example that will also use position, but I also have an example that doesn't use position, meaning that it's not on the canvas itself. If you had to do this without CodeHS, what platform do you use? I like the p5js.org editor. So this editor here is also useful. But I do like the CodeHS editor, especially because now there are errors. Before there were not errors. So if I write anything crazy, it'll actually pop up here and also display the P5JS errors that would appear in the other editor as well. All right, let's look at another example. I'll save the quiz for last because this one has so many different options. So Balloon Interactive. I stole one of my students' codes from their final projects to display a balloon because I did not want to do this. I didn't have any time. So I grabbed the student's code to add a balloon to the screen and add 2 buttons. These buttons are styled a little bit more. So I just want to show you what it looks like to style and also get it to move up and down. Yay. Okay, so let's go over the code. I have a couple of functions, but let's just start off with the setup. I am using, there's a question. I'm using myself or, oh, okay. All right. So let's start off with setup. So the P5JS stuff is just the creating of the canvas, and the DOM section is pretty much everything else. So I'll save this for last. In my draw is the entire balloon. And to make things move, we are actually going to use some math. There's a function called translate, which pretty much moves the entire shape that you create. But you do, if you don't want other objects to move with it, you have to add these 2 functions called push and pop at the top and bottom of the image that you want to move so that it only translates that object. So let's start. Start of shape movement, I guess I can say. And these are just comments for those of you who don't know. And if you don't have this, I tell my students all the time, if you don't have push and pop, whatever you put under here, like a rectangle, just to show you, it would move with it as well. So put some random locations. So there goes my box, but if, let's comment out this pop so you can see. If I put it up, it is moving up with it. So that's what push and pop is for, is just so that it only talks to one set and not anything else. So. All right, to make the translate move, we have to give it an X and Y value. 0 is the X location, which means that I don't want to move on 0. I want to move on Y. So I have a variable. If you want to move or change something, you have to have a variable. If you just have a static value like 100, every time I press this up and down button, nothing will happen because I'm always saying translate at X 0 and Y equaling 100. So I have a balloon Y variable that I create at the top. I set the value to 0, which is its original place. And then I have 2 functions called up and down that will increase or decrease the balloon's number values. So it's the canvas is backwards for Y, meaning that the origin is here, 0, 0. It's not in the center, it's up here. So when I am subtracting, I'm actually going up. And when I'm adding to Y, I'm actually going down. So that's why it's kind of inverted. And so these functions are attached to my mouse press events for each of my buttons. So I have, this is my up button right here. So I created a button called up, and you can see I don't have a value in this. I only have 1 parameter used instead of 2. And this is just because I just want the function to do stuff, and I don't really care about what value is in the button because I have 2 separate functions to do what I want it to do. So I have it, I have the text here, it says up, and then I have my mouse press event listener, and it will call the function up to go up, and the same thing for down. And then I added some styling. So if you know anything about CSS, you can add any of the CSS that you normally would use, such as adding a background, setting it. So I added a background, set it to light gray. I also added a width, and I set it to 75 pixels. And I also added a border that has the thickness of 3px, and it's white and solid. And I applied it to the same way. I can do all of these things on 3 separate lines. So if this is how your brain thinks, you can definitely do it this way. I was just trying to find ways to shorten it so you don't end up with a lot of lines of code. And once again, you can also fork this. Maybe you can challenge yourself to add a left and right button. See if you can get it to move left and right. So any questions so far? I thought about how you can apply this into the classroom. You can start off with a student just making a picture, right? And then teaching the students how to add buttons to get it to move. So that's how you can like scaffold it. No questions? Cool. I think you can. All right, let's go to the last one. The one that takes up pretty much the rest of the time is this quiz idea. So these quiz ideas, I chose 4 of the types that are available in P5JS. So I just want to go and show you what is available for input. So we have input, which is the input box. I chose that. There is a slider option. Can you insert a picture to a blog and a website? Yes, you can. Insert our project to a blog on a website. So yes, from the sandbox, that is true. We can do that. The way you do it is you press the share button. Let's do it on this one. And you'll have a couple of options. So if you want to share just the URL or link, you would just copy this, but there is an embed option. So if you click embed, it'll give you the iframe, and you also have other attributes that you can change. So you can choose to display both the app and the code, the app only, the code only. You can also choose your width and heights. You can also make it read only so that no one can modify. And then you have even an upload option for an image. And then once you add those settings, or if you don't want to change anything, you could just copy this and then embed it right into your website. Any other questions? Cool. Welcome. All right, going back to the DOM options, we have, like I mentioned before, input allows you to type in something. We have a slider where you can go left and right. So if I click these, you can actually see real world examples of how these elements are being used. I'll go back. We also have a checkbox, a button, which you've seen, select, which is a drop-down option. Let me show you different ways to do that. And color picker, radio, and I think that's it. Those are the, well, these are also inputs, video and audio and file. I haven't tried these yet to see how they work, but these are also inputs. Anything that, well, I can't say anything that says create because that's not true. Input, oh, well, create input. So create slider, this. Oh, they're all in order. So from slider all the way to create audio, that's all input. So, and create capture is interesting. This allows you to take a picture. So that's also input. And create elements allows you to create any HTML element. So if you want to do an element like H5, there's no such thing as create H5 in the section. You can actually use create element to do create H5. A lot of options. In my section, my code or sample code, I only chose 4. And I feel like 4 is already a lot. So it's really up to you to know your students and only choose things that you think that they can accomplish and then scaffold up. So I'm going to run. I chose 4 question types. I do believe when I first did this with my students last year, I only gave them 2 question types, but I want to show 4 for this demo. So the first question type is just buttons. So you've seen how buttons work. You press something and something happens. So with this, I'm pressing a button and the background is changing red or green depending on the button that I click on. For this question type, this is a drop-down menu. So the question is, what is not a fruit? And I choose whatever choice that I want to answer, and then I press the check. And right next to it, this is a span or space for text. And I'm going to display if it's correct or incorrect. So if I go, the answer is actually onion. So I press check and it'll say correct. Question type 3 requires you to type in something. So if I write some randomness and press the check, it'll say incorrect or correct. The answer is straw. And that will do correct. And then last but not least, we have radio boxes. Does anybody know the answer to this one? Which best-selling toy of 1983 caused hysteria, resulting in riots? What's the answer? You're on mute.
I think it's Cabbage Patch Kids.
I think it's Cabbage Patch Kids,
I third the Cabbage Patch. Yep.
Check. That is indeed correct. Cabbage Patch Kids is correct. So yes, we have 3 different types to choose from. So I would like to break down how this works. I also recently learned that as long as you create the variable in setup, you don't need to do it outside of this function, but I'm not sure if this is true for every editor. I know it's true for P5JS. I'm in CodeHS, but this is why this is commented out to see if it will still work. All right, so question type 1. One thing I'll say when I did this with my students last year was before we even got to the code, I told them what their question type options were. And last year it was just multiple choice button or an input box. And I told them you have to make at least 5 questions that use multiple choice buttons and 5 questions that use input boxes. Then I have the students write out all of their questions and decide what will be multiple choice buttons and which ones will be input boxes. So planning is very important before they even get to the code, because if you don't plan, when you're trying to help them, they might not have a clue of how to help, because sometimes I also help by just showing them how to scaffold. So maybe they don't know how to add buttons yet or input boxes or anything, but they can for sure type in the question. Okay, so to create a question, we use create P, which just stands for create a paragraph. And so here's my first question here. And I like to keep everything organized by, just writing some comments. So question 1 is a multiple choice question. And so I don't have a canvas. I put canvas 0, 0, just so that I can have all the space possible, because if you don't put canvas 0, 0, you end up with this default space of like 200 pixels or something like that. I think I looked and inspected it. So this is not using the canvas. This is just using the HTML page. So I create a question, and then the pattern is create a question, then have them answer it, and then create a span so that it can display if it's correct or incorrect. I think the first one I didn't put a span. I think, it just does this, but I could put a span in there. But anywho, so I have 4 buttons. They display 1, 2, 5, and 7. And this is how many rings are in the Olympic flag. And so students also need to know which one is correct. So I would probably suggest, just having the student mark which one is correct or label all of them so they know exactly which one is right and which one is wrong. So when the mouse is pressed, when I click on the events, it's going to go to this function called check Q1. I have a function for every question, and I organize it towards the bottom. So all of my functions are at the bottom. I recommend that for students as well. It's to put all of your code that will display here, and then all of your functions towards the bottom. So this is question 1 function. So what is happening is I'm using this again, which means that it's grabbing the value of whatever button I click on. So it will either grab 1, 2, 5, or 7 as its value. And I wrote a simple if statement that says, if this value is equal to 5, then I don't want to say anything. I just want to change the style of the button to be light green. So it'll show this green button. And then I have in my else statement, set it to red. And so that's a simple way to do it. And honestly, if all your students can understand is just doing a simple if else statement, then it's fine. They can just do this consistently for all of their questions. All of the other questions I figured out a way to make it a little bit more efficient, so I don't have to do a whole bunch of if else statements. I'm going to do the ternary operator instead. So let's go back up. Any questions about the first question type? We've already seen a couple of buttons, so I wonder if anybody has any questions for question type 1. Okay. Question type 2 is a select button. So we ask our question as always right here. I was experimenting to see if I can add just regular HTML code inside of a create P, and I can. So BR stands for break. And this is why question type 2 is on 1 line. And this is why what is not a fruit is on a 2nd line. So you can actually add your own HTML into these functions as well, which is cool. Right, so I have my next input is create a select. And so select will automatically make a drop-down button. And to make options for the drop-down button, you have to save the select into a variable and then add all of the options that you want it to have. So I'm going to add a pear option, kiwi, avocado, and onion. And this is what will get displayed. I add a button that's next to it that will check to see if it's correct. There are some functions or events that you can connect to a select that is just listening to see if you click on anything. I chose not to do it that way. I wanted to have a button attached to everything because I feel like it was just easier for all students to understand, but there are some other event listeners that you can do with select. And so this button is going to go straight to check question 2. And for some students who like to add emojis, this is just an emoji. Honestly, it's just when you press Control Command Space, you can add an emoji and it will display there. So maybe I'll change my correct text to a smiley face or something like that. Go back. And then I have a span, which will display my text here. So this is a span, but right now it has nothing in it. So how did I simplify this if statement? Well, what I did was, I'm gonna break this down because this seems like a lot, because I have another function here. So before I go over what this function is, I want to find a way to shorten this if-else statement. I can do that by doing this thing called ternary operator. So let's say I save the answer. Oh wait, I want to know response. I'm going to make a variable called response, and I want it to tell me correct or incorrect based off of if they type or select onion. So to select an onion value, I need to look at the value that currently exists, which is s2.value. And I could have just done if s2.value equals onion, then do this, but I'm going to do something else. So if I put it this way, if I say s2.value equals onion, this is a short way to do an if statement. If I add a question mark, the question mark pretty much is, if I had to write this in a sentence, it says, if the value of onion, if s2.value is equal to onion, then say correct, or save in the response variable the word correct. Else, the colon stands for the else, say that it's incorrect. I have my keyboard on. So what will happen is, instead of me writing all of this, it will either save into the variable response correct or incorrect, all in one line. So this is very, very simple and easy to explain. You can even have, if a student just doesn't understand, you can take a screenshot of the code and just like label what each thing is and how it is the same as just this if else statement. So this is the if part, this is the if condition. And if it is true, we do this. And if it's not true, or if it's else, we do this. And you have to put the question mark and the colon in those spaces in order for it to work. So I have that response. And then I also want to grab the span that it's attached to. So for this, it's A2. And I want to add HTML to it, which is really just to add text. So I'm going to say A2.html, add the response that comes out from that. Okay, I'll run and test it. So it'll give me incorrect, or it will give me correct. Okay, so a student can see this, can say, okay, I get this. I'm just gonna do this function this way and copy and paste and answer all of my questions this way. But I wanted to find another way to make it even more efficient. So for my other two functions, I made a second function that will take the span value. So A2, A1, A3, A4, whatever is going to display incorrect or correct. And I also want to grab the response and just have it point to that location automatically. So I just made a function that will do that. So this function will not only look at the span, whatever span I put in the parameter, it'll add the response, and then it also will add a color that will be either incorrect or correct. If the response equals to correct, it'll turn green, but if it's not correct, it'll turn red. So I just made it a little bit more efficient. So if you don't understand how this works, you can simply do it either this way or this way. It's up to you. So in question 3, this is an input box. If I go here, input boxes are fairly short. You ask the question, you create the input, you make a button, and you create a span for the answer. In the if statement, not if statement, in the function that it goes to, I have a function that I make to check everything. So I am going to give it the span where the answer should go, which is A3. And then I am going to give it an incorrect or a correct value. So this is my response. But instead of saying response equals and then figuring it out, I just put it all in one, and it will still just return correct or incorrect, and it will save it as the response in the function that I used. And then the same thing for radio boxes. Radio boxes look kind of like the select. You create a radio box, and then you provide options. You make your button and the area that it will show if it's correct or incorrect, and you pretty much do the same thing. You're looking to just see if the value that's selected matches up with the value that should be correct. Any questions? I know it's a lot. There's a lot to like explore and try out. With this, I would challenge you. I showed 4 question types, but I would recommend if you were trying to just make a quick quiz, choose 2. Just two input types and make a quiz out of that. And I would actually probably tell you not to do type, if you're going to choose 2, do 2 that are different. So 2 and 4 are kind of similar. So you might want to do, if you are interested in doing 2 or 4, choose one of them and then choose either type 1 or type 3. All right, I'm looking at the time. We only have 7 minutes left. We are flying. Okay, so how do you apply this to the classroom? I've been giving you tips and tricks along the way, but I also have an official slide about this. So you want to decide what functions and concepts you want to teach. Now, how you decide this is really up to you. Sometimes I look at the reference section to see, oh, I like this. Or actually, what really helps for me is if I make a program and I see what it takes to do the program and see if it's possible for my students. And that's how I decide what concepts and functions that I want to teach them. Then you want to scaffold the plan to make sure that you are able to teach all those concepts. Make sure it's fun and add activities along the way. If you click this, it's going to show you activities for just regular P5JS. So this is my plan for when my students just got started with P5JS. So this is how I scaffolded the activities. And so all of these concepts were matched up with an activity. So for example, like fill and ellipse, I made them, and fill, ellipse, like all of these together getting started, I made them make a robot using the shapes and adding colors. For triangle, quad, custom shapes and lines, I think I made them do an emoji or make a landscape with this concept. So everything had a project attached to it so that they can, they learn the skills by doing a couple of small activities, and then they build a project with it. Differentiation. So differentiation varies, but these are some things that I thought of, which is normally I have to sit down and have the students identify how the patterns work in the code, because all of it is really a pattern. And once they understand the pattern, they can just replicate the same pattern. You can also provide starter code, but I would be careful about just providing starter code, because unless they understand how the starter code already works, you might have to also just go in and just write comments of where you want them to add on to the code. So just be mindful of that. You can use the CodeHS platform to manage activities. I have previous videos and pictures of like how I've done this in CodeHS. I've made my own P5JS units, and that's all in the chat and in the slide set. And then for projects that take more time, make sure that the students plan out the code. I mentioned this before. It's very important for them to plan. If they don't plan, you don't really know where they're trying to get to. And then encourage the students to share, because they make really good projects, especially if you're doing the unit in multiple years or throughout the, like my ninth graders from last year versus my ninth graders this year, they've done more than my years prior because I got used to, or I got better at scaffolding the projects and activities. All right, any questions? So many things I shared, I know. The whole point is to really just have fun. And I think visuals help that. And that's why I'm such a fan of P5JS.
This was so awesome. I had another computer up because everything's kind of slow on Zoom, and I was playing in the sandbox over here with P5JS. So this was awesome. And I know there's a ton of links. Portia is awesome with just creating so many amazing things and then sharing everything. So thank you, Portia. We will definitely include all of these links. You'll get the slides, the recording, everything in the follow-up email. So you will definitely get all of that. Yeah, and we do have one more thing for you. If you could take a moment to fill out our survey, codehs.com/workshop survey. Linda just threw that into chat. We would love it if you could tell us what you thought, and tell us what else would you like to see. I am not done asking Portia what she wants to do next. So go ahead and toss that info into the workshop survey, and we'll start planning, right, Portia? She's already got ideas, just so y'all know. And we'll definitely make sure that you do have all those links right now for previous workshops, but there will definitely, those links will be in there as well. And Linda also did toss into chat the link for upcoming workshops. So we do have more upcoming. One of our attendees is on that list right now for a workshop coming up in a few weeks. So Kent Pendleton is on there. We're actually going to be having a few more workshops popping up in the next few days. And if you're really liking P5JS, we've got another teacher trainer who is going to be talking P5JS with physics. So that will be showing up in the next couple of days as well. I'd go ahead and just sign up for all of them. Then, you know, that is how I always did it as a teacher. I thought, ooh, I want to see them all. And then even if you can't attend, we'll send you the recordings. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but that was how excited I would get about these things. All right. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up Portia's session for tonight? Portia, this has been amazing. As always, I am inspired. I'm definitely going to be trying some more things out. I leave these sessions and I just start coding that night. So, so very excited to play. And if questions do come up, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Send an email anytime. If I can't answer the question, I'll just ask Portia and she'll help. So, all right. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll go ahead and wrap up for tonight. Have a wonderful evening. We cannot wait to see you at the next workshop. So see you all soon. Thank you.